When I was young, our family owned a used bookstore for several years, and I would spend day after day reading books at my mother's side. It was a bonding of a sort, yet we were both lost in a fantasy world that didn't involve the other. I grew up loving books and stories like my mother, but of a much different genre. While my favorite author at the time was Judy Blume, my mother was obsessed with real-life crime mysteries. Sitting side by side as we read was as close as we came to communicating. There was love and physical affection between us, but there were also hidden stories. At 10 years old, I was crushing hard on several of my girlfriends before I even knew what that meant. There was Etta, my cute neighbor, who would only speak to me on the bus ride home, but never at school. She would come over on hot days and swim in our above-ground pool. An above-ground pool was cool back in the 80s, so that was my advantage with Etta. We lived across the street from one another on opposite ends of a deep valley. If I wanted her to hang out, I would yell, "Etta!" hearing it echo in the valley, and then shout, "Come over." One summer afternoon, my mother caught us swimming naked together, and her strong reaction scared me. A scolding and a sharp, angry look followed by a moody silence, a reaction that became very familiar as I was growing up. Through the years, I would experience similar reactions regarding my life choices and sexuality. Although we had always been emotionally far apart, we were physically close. I used to retreat to her bedroom and sit next to her while she read, my head on her lap. Other times, I would just watch her move about her room as she undressed or put away clothes. When she got home from work, she would march directly to her bedroom and take off her bra, sighing with relief. Her enormous breasts scared me when I was little. They fell to gravity and took up so much of her body that they had power and strength of their own. Yet my mother never seemed to use them in the ways that other women did. They were a burden to her, yet beautiful and large, and men noticed them just as they would on me years later. I observed her breasts often and somehow knew that they were some aspect to being a woman and that they were important. I came to know my body by way of observing my mother's. We had the same wide, curvy hips and square shoulders and protruding belly. Yet I used my body differently than my mother had. I had a thing for tomboyish girls that allowed me to use my sexuality in ways I hadn't before. Devon was the first girl who made me aware of this power. On one of our first hangouts, she helped me do work in my backyard. I remember bending down to plant a succulent in the ground. I dug a hole and gently placed the cactus in it and started to fill up the dirt. It was an erotic moment that I took full advantage of. I could feel my pants slipping down my butt, and I knew how much was exposed to Devon, who was behind me. I stayed there and let her take it in. I then turned and bent over, a slight jolt of pleasure as my breasts slipped out of their cups. That restricted place where wire met the bone felt undone, and it was so nice to feel unleashed. Women are always being told to keep close the flesh that swings from their body. Cover it, lift it, lose it, show it. My body was finally mine to reveal the way I wanted, and this control pleased me. I turned around and locked eyes with Devon, understanding this charge between us and letting the thrill of it settle in. This and many affairs with women over the years became my secret that I hid from our family. My mother had grown up poor in Detroit, Michigan. As a little kid, her first memories were the period coming out of the Great Depression. A child of Sicilian immigrants, my mother grew up with Italian and English spoken at home. Her mother was a devout Catholic, which contributed to my mother's conservatism. At that time in the inner city, tension between European immigrants and African Americans were rising in a competitive industrial job market. My mother's neighbors included Polish people, African Americans from the South, Jews, and Italians. It was a time when a belief about the American dream ran strong and deep, especially for immigrants who were fleeing war and poverty in their native countries. As a child, my mother must have observed and internalized the poverty and racial tension that surrounded her, which led to some racially tinged outbursts over the years. I was often shocked for her in these moments, yet it allowed me a rare glimpse into how the makings of geography and history make their mark on all of us. After she moved out west in her 20s, my mother worked a regular job to help support her family, but later became an artist and has been painting for close to 50 years. She has become very good at it, opening her own gallery and winning local awards. What was it like to raise 4 children as she struggled to find time to paint? Her artist studio was in one tiny corner of the house, and I would visit it when I wanted to feel close to her. Half-finished paintings were strewn around, wooden palettes, easels, thick brushes, the smell of dried oil paint on canvas. She never shared her love for it with the family, perhaps needing this world to herself. Our family was like this, orbiting each other in domestic space, but knowing very little about one another. Over the years, I have collected other small clues about my mother. She had lost a child, my older brother, when he was 1 year old. His lack of presence resided there, in the space between her and the rest of my siblings. I think she suffered more from his death than I will ever know. Once I found a painting of hers, a self-portrait, in one of her dusty closets. My mom had painted herself in a grotesque manner, bulging eyes with dark circles under them, elongated limbs. The title of the work was Rough Night. I didn't ask her about the significance of it. I had become like her, observing but never asking questions. My mom is old now, and I see her often. I am a dutiful daughter. We are closer now, and time and perspective has made me understand her more. She still lives in my childhood home, stubbornly refusing to give up the freedom of how she has lived for 50 years. About 7 miles out past town, our family home is perched on a hill at the end of a gutted road, with an extraordinary view. Waves of weed, golden and dry, line the uneven road. Oak trees dot the landscape, and it is clear this tree is king. Their trunks are massive, rooted so deeply that it took years to develop. The root systems of mature oaks can extend many miles, overlapping underground even as they seem separate on the surface. Their shade is like no other, the branches fanning out endlessly to provide protection from the unbearable heat. Hardy, heavy presences that lack the drama of flowers or fruit. A few years ago, an oak beetle had begun threatening many of the oldest, grandest trees. Drought, thirst. I was shocked at the decline of the oaks. Bowed branches and faded bark, the leaves changing from a dark tree to yellow. It was this same visit that I really understood how much my mother had aged. That moment when you realize the ones you love are beginning to lose control. During this visit, I opened the front door and noticed the charred wall in the kitchen. Black patches spotted the wall near the oven. It was clear there had been a fire, and my mother had not been able to smell the smoke because she had lost her sense of smell in an accident years before. My father went into the hospital during Thanksgiving break a few years ago. On a clear, sunny day in November, in mid-conversation, my father started to tilt back and forth, and then like a paper fan folding onto itself, he started to crumple to the floor as he was rushed to the hospital. When he came home from the hospital, my mother looked like she had aged 10 years in the last 24 hours. Weeks later, we would realize the profound shock it had on her when her hair fell out and she went almost completely bald. I saw her differently in the following days, her hunched back always managing to catch me off guard, my mother's body, the one that lifted and held me all those years, a beloved body in decline. On my parents' land, the dried buckwheat is always a concern in the summer. Wild, soft pillows the size of a fingertip that crumble under touch. Muted browns and ochre paled in the sharp heat. On my many walks around their property over the years, I would find the bones of animals, rats, bunnies, squirrels. One time, my child hands reached past the sage stalk for the husk of a snake, shedding its ancient skin for the chance to reinvent itself. I remember carrying it home, demanding what it was. My parents explained, smiling at my wonder. Winter rains brought some relief last year. The cycle of drought is broken for now, a respite for the remaining resident oaks dotting the landscape. The last time I visited the house on the hill, my mother announced that she had finished and sold another painting, a simple smile spreading across her face. She then pointed to the oak tree hovering above us and was delighted at the new leathery leaves growing in as spring approached. Somehow we have come to a new understanding at this stage in our lives. We are here learning just to be with one another, accepting our flaws and secrets, laughing more, closing the gap, and leaning towards rather than away from one another.